All right, we'll get started. Hello, and thank you all for joining us today. For today's OR-MEP webinar, we'll be reviewing the open enrollment application process for 2024 round 2. My name is Mecca Abraham, OR-MEP program manager. And before we dive into open enrollment, I wanted to first provide a quick overview on how you can participate in today's Zoom webinar. So all attendees are currently in listen-only mode and muted. We do, however, want to hear from you if you have any questions. You can enter questions via the Q&A button, and our plan is to take as many questions as we can at the end after we have completed our presentation. And to enable captions, you can click the Show Captions button. You can select the arrow up icon to select captions in English, as well as translated captions in another language. We are recording today's webinar, and we'll make the recording and a PDF of this presentation available on the OR-MEP website, and it'll also be shared out via email as well. So today, our agenda that we have planned, we'll start off with a program overview of OR-MEP, then we'll dive into the open enrollment application process. We'll cover the updates compared to the last round, and then we'll get into the details of the open enrollment requirements and each criteria, and then we'll end things off with a live demo of an application, and then we'll close things off with Q&A. I'm joined by my colleagues, Julia Sinix, who will be covering the open enrollment criteria with me today. Julia is the OR-MEP technical manager. Also joined by Kristen Bellows, OR-MEP marketing manager, who is monitoring the Q&A box for questions and any technical issues. And finally, Tim Clark, OR-MEP program manager from the OHCS side and state energy program coordinator. So we'll get things started with the OR-MEP program overview. So to jump into things, the Oregon Multifamily Energy Program, that we refer to in short form as OR-MEP, is brought to you by Oregon Housing and Community Services. The program provides cash incentives and design support for energy efficiency upgrades in affordable multifamily rental retrofits and new construction. The program is funded through the public purpose charge collected by the two main investor-owned electric utilities in the state, Pacific Power and Portland General Electric. The goal of OR-MEP is to reduce the energy burden for residents with limited incomes across affordable multifamily rental housing. We do this through promoting energy efficient building design with affordable housing owners and developers, and then energy efficient building use with affordable housing residents. To be eligible for OR-MEP, projects must meet the following requirements: be an existing or new construction multifamily rental property with at least 5 residential units per buildings. Campuses of 5 or more duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes are also eligible. The property must also receive electricity from Pacific Power or Portland General Electric. It also must be heated by a hardwired electrical heating system. And finally, meet program affordability requirements where residents in at least 50% of the units are at or below 80% area median income, and those units must remain affordable for at least 10 years. So now let's jump into the open enrollment application process. As you all know, Open Enrollment 2024 Round 2 is now live, and we are currently accepting applications. It opened last Monday, July 15th, and will be open for 45 days until Friday, August 30th. After the enrollment round closes, we are expecting to notify selected projects within 30 days by October 1st. And as a reminder, open enrollment is now the first stage in the process to participate in OR-MEP, and only selected open enrollment applicants are eligible for the next program stages to the right, like reserving incentives and installing upgrades. Please note that when projects are selected for open enrollment, the project is selected to be funded. After being selected, projects must finalize their energy efficiency plan and scope of work with us in order to reserve incentives. and then we can commit specific dollar amounts to your project. So while we will fund every selected open enrollment project, the actual funding amounts are not confirmed by OR-MEP until you complete the incentive reservation process. And as we've shared in previous updates, due to the increased demand and interest in the program, we now have more projects interested in the program than funding available. So this open enrollment process is a competitive application process with DEI-focused criteria to prioritize highest scoring projects for funding. The open enrollment prioritization criteria was co-created between the program team and the DEI coalition that was formed in 2022. And we work closely with the DEI coalition to incorporate updates this round after assessing the results from the previous round. So here's a table of the scoring categories and weighting. We'll be going over each of these scored criteria next, but you'll see there is prioritization towards serving BIPOC communities and residents, communities with high energy burden, rural communities, and other communities that are more resource constrained, naturally occurring affordable housing properties, which are considered current unsubsidized or unregulated affordable housing, serving households with very low incomes, and prioritizing nonprofit and housing authority applicants. You can find the complete details that we'll be reviewing today in the open enrollment application guide that is found on the OR-MEP website. Here's an overview of the 5-year open enrollment funding calendar from 2023 to 2027. So we have planned to have funding rounds every six months to ensure equitable distribution of the current $14 million available in funding through 2027. So we've completed 2 rounds so far, and in this current round for 2024 round 2, we have $1.75 million available. And based on historical per apartment unit incentive trends of projects, we're estimating to enroll about 525 units in this round. The second table at the bottom notes the set-aside categories for the $1.75 million, which is equally split between projects in Pacific Power and Portland General Electric service area. So there is $875,000 for each utility service area, and then within each utility, funding is equally split among new construction and existing multifamily properties. If you have a potential project, you might be asking yourself, should I apply for this open enrollment funding round? We encourage project teams to apply for this round if your project meets the following prerequisites if selected for open enrollment, if selected in this open enrollment round. First, the project will finalize development of the energy efficiency scope and reserve incentives within 6 months of open enrollment selection. So this would be approximately by April 1st, 2024. And then the second prerequisite is that projects will start construction or upgrades within 18 months of open enrollment selection. The intent is that projects that are applying are viable projects and can move forward if selected for funding within this timeline. If your project is not ready to commit to these timelines, or you're awaiting confirmation of other funding sources to confidently move forward, we ask that you wait for the next open enrollment round to apply, which will, the next round will come in January 2025. We want to prioritize projects that are ready to move forward immediately after being selected, and projects with an uncertain viability to move forward takes away a spot from another project that could benefit from funding in this round. So right now I'll go over the criteria updates compared to the last round. There are 2 main updates that we made, and this was based on the results and feedback we received from applicants in the last round. The first is that we updated the rural and non-rural definition and updated to use a zip code lookup using the rural and urban designation from OHCS's Office of Rural Health. So there's a link here, and then the application guide also has a link to where you can find that. It's built into the workbook, so when you enter your zip code, it will automatically respond back if your project is considered rural or non-rural. And the second update is that for the criteria project is primarily serving BIPOC residents. This was updated with the following two options, depending on if a project is located in a rural community. And this update was made to address limited availability of BIPOC culturally specific organizations in rural communities. So the first option is if for BIPOC culturally specific organizations, this is available for all projects statewide. And it's when a project is either owned, managed, or partnering with a BIPOC culturally specific organization, because this is an indicator that the BIPOC community is being reflected as residents of an affordable multifamily rental property. So we had that option for BIPOC culturally specific organizations the last round. And so what's new for this round is the option for a BIPOC culturally responsive organization, which is available for projects located in rural communities only. And this is if the project is owned or developed by a BIPOC culturally responsive organization, which is an indicator that the BIPOC community would be reflected as residents in the property. So Julia will go into more details on these two criteria, and there are definitions for these two organization types in the application guide. So as you're looking into this criteria, please do review that. And I will just note, because there have been updates this round, to remember to submit applications using the 2024 round 2 version of the application that's found on the OR-MEP website. You should discontinue using the application from the previous round because there are updates. And now I will pass it on to Julia, who will get into the details of the criteria.
Thanks, Mecca. All right, so now we're going to go over each of the 7 scored prioritization criteria. And like Mecca mentioned, we only made minor changes this round, and I'll point those out as they come up. So the first criteria is criteria 1, and it looks at the percent of BIPOC community members in the census tract where the project is located. So this category has stayed almost exactly the same. The point structure and the percent thresholds have not changed. And when you enter the project's address at the top of the application, this question is going to be automatically filled out for you. But if you were curious, the data source for this criteria can be found on the Affordable Housing Assessment Map with the ethnicity and race census tract layer toggled on, and it's under the percent of BIPOC. And the intent of this criteria is to prioritize projects that are located in BIPOC communities. And the percent thresholds and the points are measured differently if you're a rural project versus a non-rural projects. And this is intended to account for varying conditions across the state, with rural projects starting at a lower BIPOC threshold. And the definition of rural and non-rural is from the OHSU Office of Rural Health, Rural and Frontier Data, and it's based on the project zip code. And this is the only minor change to this criteria, like Mega mentioned, and it only applies, the change only applies really to a few zip codes that were previously considered urban, but is now rural, or vice versa. The example on the right here is a property in Salem. The zip code is a non-rural zip code, and it's located in a census tract with 21.1% BIPOC. And comparing that against the table here, this falls in the 15 to 24% range, which is eligible for 1 point. Next slide, please. Criteria 2 looks at how the project will be serving BIPOC communities. So this is the category that had the biggest change based on feedback that we received. And there are now 2 options depending on where your project is located. So option A is available to rural and non-rural projects. And this is the same requirements as they were this last round. And to qualify for points in option A, the project must be owned or managed by a BIPOC culturally specific organization or be partnering with one in some capacity. And the key word there is culturally specific or specific, so CSO. And we'll define that in the next page here. But and then option B is available only to rural projects. And this is the part that's new this round. And while there are great BIPOC CSOs doing work in rural areas, we received a lot of feedback that they don't have the same prevalence or bandwidth as those who do work in the urban areas. So in response to that, projects in rural areas are now eligible to earn 3 points if they can demonstrate that they are a culturally responsive organization. So CROs, and we'll define that in the next page. And the intent of this criteria is to prioritize projects that are explicitly designed and located to address displacement of BIPOC residents and communities to ensure that underserved communities do end up represented as residents of the property. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm not going to roll the full definitions right now, but I do encourage you to read the definitions prior to answering this question and reach out if you have any questions about them. So we focus a lot on culturally specific versus culturally responsive organization, which separates option A from B. But it's important to remember that we are looking specifically at BIPOC culturally specific or responsive organization. And BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. So they are communities that hold a primary racial identity with self-definition by the community members, and they typically share a historic and current experiences of racism. And the next two are like broad, widely accepted definitions of culturally specific and culturally responsive organizations. But keep in mind that these definitions do encompass cultures that expand beyond just race, but OR-MEP is looking specific. Man, I'm having a really hard time with that word, but we're looking for BIPOC CSOs and CROs. So with that in mind, we're going to define culturally specific organization. Remember, the keyword is specific. These are nonprofit organizations that exist to serve a specific underserved community that's least likely to apply for housing occupancy. And these are organizations that serve as a representative of the community or a segment of the community, and they provide affordable housing to low-income households. And they can demonstrate that the community that they serve are least likely to apply for funding due to, for example, a lack of targeted outreach, language support, established trust. And then lastly, culturally responsive organization. Culturally responsive organizations comprehensively address power relationships throughout the organization to provide those services that are largely lacking. And these organizations are very intentional about cultural competency and have established trusted relationships with communities that are historically underserved. They are intentional about hiring racially, culturally, and language diverse staff because they recognize the impact of that representation on the communities that they serve. And lastly, they have a proven record of addressing conflicts and dynamics of inclusion versus exclusion. Next slide, please. So let's look at option A. So this is for BIPOC culturally specific organization, which is that higher tier, right, of threshold. And these points are available to all projects statewide that are owned, managed, or partnering with a BIPOC culturally specific organization. If you applied this last round back in January, this is the exact same question that was asked for this criteria. So for the points, I'm going to start at the bottom with how to get the full 5 points. So for full 5 points, a BIPOC culturally specific organization must be the sole or part owner of the property, or they must be managing or will be managing the property. And for the middle tier, for the 3 points, the project must be partnering with a BIPOC culturally specific organization that is providing services at the property. So, for example, the CSO might be contributing to the design and development of the property in order to meet the unique needs and preferences of the community that they're serving. Or the organization is providing ongoing culturally sensitive support to residents on site at the property on a permanent basis. And lastly, for 1 point, the property is advertising or marketing the property through a BIPOC culturally specific organization. But in this case, the organization isn't necessarily providing any support or guidance to the property in any significant way. So for the right side, let's talk about how you demonstrate the level of partnership. So for any points in this category, we ask the first two questions. The first one being that we ask you to provide the name of the BIPOC culturally specific organization. Please enter the organization's full name and avoid acronyms. And if it's a large, national, international organization with a local chapter that you're working with, please describe which one it is. And then number two, please explain how the organization is effective in working with BIPOC community in the project's region. And then last question, the last question is only applicable for the 3-point tier. And it's a checklist, and we'll look at that in the next tab if we can switch over. Oh, yeah, just go ahead and go to the next. Thank you. The 3-point tier has that extra question. You don't have to write out a narrative, but we did capture some of the common activities that fit the spirit of this partnership that we're talking about. Please select all that applies to you, to your partnership. And if there are additional activities that you'd like to share with us, there is a text box at the bottom. Could you click for me? And the important note here is if the narrative questions are left blank or they're incomplete, we're going to adjust the score to 0. We will make every effort to send it back to you for corrections before the end of open enrollment. So if you have any questions on it, please reach out to us so we don't have to do the back and forth. And then always applying earlier is better than later. All right, next slide, please. So now we're going to move on to option B of the second criteria. And this is new this round. So option B is BIPOC culturally responsive organization option, which is available for projects that are located in rural communities that are owned or developed by BIPOC culturally responsive organization. And this criteria is eligible for 3 points. So for organizations that identify as a culturally responsive organization are pursuing these 3 points available for option B, there are 2 parts to the supporting questions. Part 1 is a checklist, and this checklist is intended to serve as an opportunity for you to self-evaluate your own organization. BIPOC culturally responsive organizations that meet our definition conduct many of these activities that we listed in this checklist. And so if those apply to you, please check every single activity that your organization is currently doing or plan to do once it's open. And then once you get through that checklist and you feel that your organization does meet our requirements, please move on to part 2, where you'll have the opportunity to describe specifically how your organization is a culturally responsive organization, and it's through 3 narrative questions. The first narrative is regarding the organization's composition and how the organization is well equipped to serve the needs of the BIPOC community. And the second question is regarding the community relationships and trust and what existing relationships you have with diverse cultural groups that lead to BIPOC residents being reflected as residents at this or other properties that you serve. And the third and last question is regarding community outreach efforts. So specifically, what community outreach plans exist to reach BIPOC communities, and what does success look like for you and your organization? And thank you. And again, this question, if the narrative response is blank or incomplete, this will score to 0. So please apply early and reach out to us if you have any questions. Next slide, please. All right. So criteria 3 looks at the project's high priority area index score, which is a cumulative index assessing energy burden. So we didn't make any changes to this criteria compared to the last open enrollment round in January. So this is also a situation you enter the address at the top of the application, and this is going to be filled out for you. And the data source, again, is the Affordable Housing Assessment Map with the high priority area index census tract turned on, and then the index at the very bottom there. The intent of this criteria is to prioritize projects that are located in an area with high priority index score based on energy burden. And energy burden is a metric that's defined in the state developed 10-year plan for reducing the energy burden in Oregon affordable housing. But a quick definition is that it's the proportion of your income that's going toward your energy bills. This index was created to more easily identify locations in Oregon that have the greatest energy burden. And the index includes a measure of energy burden itself, along with other factors that are known to be a driver of energy burden, including economic drivers like the affordability hardships due to lower household income, physical drivers like poor home energy efficiency due to the home's vintage, and systemic drivers like housing inequality issues due to ethnicity and race. As an example, this property on the right is in Salem. It is in a census tract with a high priority area index score of 2.5. And comparing against the table to the left here, this project falls in the 2 to 2.99 range, which is eligible for 3 points. Next slide, please. All right, criteria 4 is about the project's location relative to available resources. So we didn't make any changes to this criteria compared to the last open enrollment round, again, with the exception of that definition of rural versus non-rural. And this criteria provides, this criteria prioritizes projects that are located in areas that are currently underserved by OR-MEP, and that due to their location away from urban centers, these projects tend to be typically more resource constrained compared to projects that are located in populated urban areas. And the highest points are awarded to rural projects. And the definition of rural and urban, again, are based on zip codes using rural urban designation from the OHSU Office of Rural Health, Rural and Frontier Data. Again, with this category, when you enter the address at the top, this one's going to be filled out for you automatically. And then as an example, this project on the right is located in Salem, and Salem is considered urban outside of Multnomah, Washington, Clackamas County. And based on that table, it'll be eligible for 5 points. Next slide, please. Okay, so criteria 5 is for projects that are naturally occurring affordable housing, known by the program as NOAA properties. So we didn't make any changes to this criteria compared to the last open enrollment round. And this is a yes or no response that you would enter into the application. And the question that you're answering is this property currently unsubsidized, unregulated, rental housing with no active affordability agreement with a federal, state, or local agency? So the program defines NOAA properties as unsubsidized rental housing that is affordable to residents with an income between 60 and 120% area median income, and who can typically pay no more than 30% of their income to rent and utilities. And this is really key, but NOAA property owners have typically never participated in affordable housing programs. If you have a project with an expired regulatory agreement, but you are already applying for or have already been selected for funding through OHCS or another agency that requires a long-term affordability agreement, that project would not be considered a NOAA. And the intent of this criteria is to prioritize naturally occurring affordable housing. And by enrolling in OR-MEP, NOAA properties will enter into a 10-year affordability agreement with OHCS, and that helps to preserve affordable housing in Oregon. So this is the criteria that probably gets sent back the most, is the reason for applications getting sent back the most. So I just want to make sure that we're clear that majority of NOAAs are usually almost indistinguishable from market rate properties, except that they happen to serve residents that meet our income requirements and their rents are set, happening to meet our thresholds. And these are properties that are interested in entering into an affordability agreement because they already meet these requirements, and this would allow them to unlock some resources that would otherwise not be available to them. So if you identify as a NOAA, we do encourage you to reach out to us first, and we can talk through your situation and make sure that you're comfortable with that affordability agreement that you would need to enter into. All right, next slide. So criteria 6 is for projects that are serving households experiencing very low incomes. So we didn't make any changes to this category this round either. And the OR-MEP affordability requirement is that 50% of the units serve residents that are at or below 80% area median income, or AMI. And the intent of this criteria is to prioritize projects that go beyond the affordability requirements of OR-MEP. And we'll have more affordable units serving households experiencing lower incomes. And the thresholds are worded differently, but depending on if you're a NOAA or a non-NOAA. And for non-NOAA projects, please enter the income thresholds according to the affordability agreement that you already have. And for NOAA projects, since you don't have an affordability agreement in place, you'll enter these thresholds based on HUD rent requirements, and the application will walk you through that and tell you what your HUD income limits are, so you can decide which tier you fall under. Next slide, please. And this is my last one. So the last criteria, number 7, looks at if the entity is a nonprofit or a housing authority. We didn't make any changes to this criteria, and this is a simple yes or no, and it's eligible for 2 points if you're a nonprofit or a housing authority, if the applicant is. And the intent of this criteria is to prioritize nonprofit and housing authorities that are often resource constrained, more resource constrained than for-profit entities. All right, that's all I have. I'm going to pass it back to Mecca to discuss the submission process.
Thanks, Julia. Yes, so what can you expect for the application submission process? As I mentioned before, open enrollment is open for 45 days and will close on August 30th. Applications must be submitted no later than 5 p.m. on this day, and any applications submitted after this time will not be evaluated. You should submit your completed applications via email to the program email address, OHCS Multifamily Energy at trccompanies.com. Program staff will confirm receipt of applications within 2 business days. If you don't receive this confirmation, please contact us at our phone number listed here. This is especially important just due to email security. We have seen some emails come to our junk and spam email folders, and we are continuing to monitor it, but just because with increased email security, we do want to make sure that all applications submitted are received. So if you do not receive confirmation of receipt, please do call us. So as far as the application review process, applications in response to this open enrollment are reviewed and competitively ranked. Applications that have the highest scores within each set-aside category will be recommended for funding as allocated resources allow. And we anticipate issuing the notice of selected projects within 30 days of the enrollment closing. So by October 1st is our goal. And now that we've covered the content in our presentation, I'm now going to move on to doing a live demo of the open enrollment application. And I'm going to start off by going to the Oregon Multifamily Energy.com/apply page if you feel like following along. So this is the OR-MEP program website, and I'm at the apply page. You can navigate it from the home page by clicking this apply now button, or under learn how to participate, apply for incentives. So this is where you can find all things open enrollment. Right here is where you can click the application guide, and this link right here is the application workbook itself. We're also updating the FAQs here, and then this recording and webinar will be posted here as well. So I'm gonna download the application by clicking this button here, and depending on your browser, you'll see the application in your downloads button in your folder. So I already have one opened already, so I'll switch to that. So this application does run on Microsoft Excel, so you'll need Excel to open this tool. And then the first thing that I want to remind you is to review the instructions, as this covers a lot of maybe troubleshooting issues that you might have. And the first thing that you want to do is to enable content. So there are web service functions enabled in this workbook, and it requires an internet connection so we can do address lookups and confirm what census tract your project is located for. As Julia mentioned, some criteria is based off of that. So the first thing I'm going to do is enable content. And you may also need to make this a trusted document, so I'll say yes to that as well. And essentially this instruction item, applicants should fill out all light green shaded cells. And these are all throughout here, so you'll see that. And another guide, all of these warnings here, when you first open the application, will kind of prompt that the application is incomplete. And as you start to fill out the spreadsheet, check out this column for the warnings that exist, and they'll provide instructions of what's missing. And once we fill out a completed application, you should get a notification that the application is complete, and all of the warning messages in this column will disappear. So we'll take the project that Julia had mentioned in Salem with that address and start to input that. So we have the project name, street address. So this one's 900 Court Street. I will just note, it is an address lookup tool. So if you enter an address and still get this warning, invalid address, try different variations of the address like ST or street. Just abbreviations sometimes matter. But if you do run into issues, you can send your questions over to us and we can help address it and troubleshoot for you as well. So this one, 900 Court Street in Salem, Oregon, and I do need to enter the zip code 97301. So now it shows me that the project is located in Marion County, and then this is the census tract lookup code that we use in the background to run calculations and lookups. And then this is in this row, doing the lookup if this is a rural or non-rural project. So this is considered non-rural, and then this will trigger the criteria that's relevant to non-rural or rural. So I'll say this project is a new construction project. And you can see as I fill in cells, these warnings will disappear. So you can use that to guide you along. So this section was the project information. We're all complete there. And the next section is the applicant information. And I'm just gonna copy and paste some information here just to speed things up for this demo. So name, address, applicant entity type, like for-profit, nonprofit, housing authority. And then the authorized signatory who would sign and be able to bind the project for enrolling in OR-MEP. So put that information in. And then if the signatory is different than the primary contact, you can provide that person as well. Right, so that fills out the applicant information section. And then the next section is the program eligibility. So there's various questions on the eligibility. So is the project located in Oregon? Yes. Is the project a multifamily rental property with at least 5 units per building? I will say yes to that. For new construction projects, will this project receive electric service from Portland General Electric or Pacific Power? You can say yes, Portland General Electric, yes, Pacific Power, or no. So we'll say Portland General Electric. So you can see there, if I were to answer no, it will just kind of self-identify that the project is not eligible. So that will help guide you if your project is meeting eligibility as well. Next, how the project's apartments will be heated. We'll say that for this new construction project, it will be heated with a heat pump. And does it meet affordability requirements? And do you plan to install energy upgrades that result in electric savings? So we've confirmed the eligibility. And now we're getting to the prerequisites for open enrollment. So will the project finalize development of energy efficiency scope to reserve incentives within 6 months? We'll say yes to that. And then how soon will it finalize? We will say within 1 to 2 months. Will the project start construction or upgrades within 18 months of open enrollment? I'll answer yes to that. If I answered no to it, it would say the project is not meeting the prerequisite. But we will say yes, and that the project is starting. We'll give some dates for when it starts and then completes construction. And I know these dates are fluctuate and change over time, but please just fill into what your best knowledge is of the project at the time of completing this application. All right, and then these are some informational questions that we asked just to get more information. So I think like questions around if you have all funding sources confirmed in place. So you can enter yes, and then provide a narrative response there. And then if you have an energy consultant, we ask for information there. And then there are a couple of options like yes or no, I need help to find one. I have someone in mind, or I don't plan to work with an energy consultant. So we'll say yes to this, and we'll just make up an energy consultant name. And this is a new question, just trying to get a sense of other funding sources that you are pursuing for energy efficiency programs like Oregon Department of Energy, Energy Trust of Oregon, or Portland Clean Energy Funds. You can provide any information there if you're seeking other energy efficiency funding. And if you're not, we can also help make connections for your project and share your project information to explore other funding opportunities. So you can select your response if you would like us to share that information after open enrollment ends. All right, so now that we have filled out those sections, now we're getting into the criteria where there are points associated with it, the scored criteria. And the first one is project is in a BIPOC community. So you'll see there are no green cells in this section. This is auto-calculated based on the address that you entered. So this project is non-rural with the 1% BIPOC threshold, 21%. So it falls under the 15 to 29% category. And then for this next criteria, project is primarily serving BIPOC communities. Since this is a non-rural project, the only option A is available to this project. So you would fill in, answer these questions. So we'll say that this project is working with a BIPOC culturally specific organization in the form of a property owner as the property owner. So that would give us 5 points. But if you were to select other options, it would calculate the points accordingly. So if I select the BIPOC for the 5-point criteria, I need to enter the BIPOC culturally specific name. And then also provide a narrative response. So for the sake of this demo, I'm just gonna have an incomplete answer for now, but go back to it later. And I will change this project later to be a rural project, but we'll keep going for now. A lot of anytime there's a shaded cell, that means your previous selections don't require these responses. Namely, in particular, this option B that exists starting in row 105 is only for rural communities, so that's grayed out. And we'll scroll past that. And that's when we can move on to criteria number 3 for project's high priority area index. So this is also auto-calculated, so this project is eligible for 3 points. For criteria number 4, project's location relative to available resources. It's the category it falls under is urban outside of Multnomah, Washington, Clackamas County, so it's eligible for 5 points. And then project is naturally occurring affordable housing. I will say that the answer is no to that. And the second to last question is project is serving households with very low income. So as a non-NOAA project, I would select the percent of affordable units and income levels this project will serve. So we'll say 100% of the units are at or below 60% AMI, be eligible for 1 point. And then finally, the applicant entity is a nonprofit or housing authority, and we will say yes to that. So we have 2 points from that. So if we scroll up, should have essentially filled out everything that I needed to complete this application, but we'll scroll up to make sure there are no warnings in column H. And as I scroll up, I'm not seeing any warnings. And I am getting this message, the application is complete. So I do have some more work to do on the narrative sections, but that is essentially everything that I would have needed to fill out to have a complete application. So if I were to change this to a rural project, and I'll just do that quickly just to demonstrate. This is an address in Woodburn. So you'll see I now have a calc error. That's because this is an invalid address. And okay, so now we see that this is a rural project. So everything that has rural versus non-rural criteria will now adjust accordingly. I also have the application incomplete warning, so I'll just scroll down to see where I need to make corrections. So one example, this project is in the BIPOC community. It now switched over to the rural specific thresholds for this. So I do have to answer for criteria number 2, project is primarily serving BIPOC communities. Have to provide a response. I now have the option of option A for BIPOC culturally specific organization or option B, BIPOC culturally responsive organization. If I click option B, the cells that were previously grayed out in this section are now open for inputs. But I will say that this project is working with a culturally specific organization. And that should get us back to having now a complete application. So you can see, I didn't draw attention to what the points were for the Salem-based project, but there is a bit of a point difference, and this project would effectively have 28 points as entered in the inputs. So I know that was a lot to cover. If you do have any questions on the application process, please do let us know and we can answer any questions. And at this time, we'll take Q&A from the Q&A box that's coming through Zoom. So Kristen, I'll pass it off to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mecca. We do have some questions that have come through, so feel free to continue adding questions as they come up, and we'll take them as they come through. So the first question is, does solar qualify for funding through OR-MEP?
So, so OR-MEP incentivizes energy efficiency upgrades. So solar, it does not count towards that. We will cover anything within the building, like heating system upgrades, all of that. But solar is excluded from that. But there are incentives through Oregon Department of Energy for solar that you can explore instead.
Great, thank you. Okay, the next question is, we are a HUD property and our contract is due in September 2024. So we're renewing our contract on a year-by-year basis. How would that fit into scoring for the NOAA category?
Yeah, I would say for this scenario, if you could reach out to us individually, I think it sounds like a very project specific scenario. So let's get more details and we could provide more advice. It really, the intent is if the property will remain affordable for the next 10 years and already has agreements in place for that time period, it wouldn't be considered NOAA. But because you're on a year-by-year basis, I think opportunity to get more information on your specific project.
Great, thank you. A question about the different sort of categories of funding. Are those hard set-asides? So if a Pacific Power properties are undersubscribed, but Portland General Electric are oversubscribed, or if there's a difference between new construction and existing building, would the categories of funding shift?
Yeah, we do look at after we get all the applications, if within the service areas, we do kind of have a 50-50 split between the utilities. But if there were more existing buildings in PGE versus new construction in PGE, then we could serve there. But we do kind of evaluate it at the end and make shifts as needed that we can accommodate.
Okay. Next question, is there a place on the application to upload MBEST documents and write in a short summary of extenuating circumstances affecting the property?
Not familiar with that acronym, but I would say we are trying to avoid needing separate attachments for documents. So and keeping the application as simple as possible. So where there are narrative sections, that would be the best place to put any responses that you have.
Okay, great.
Also, in the body of the email submission, if you put information there, we'll see it too.
Yeah, good point, Julia.
Okay, great. Okay, the next question is related to OHCS timing. So it says, given that OHCS has a new process with uncertain timing for commitments, how is OR-MEP considering this in timelines?
We haven't gotten this question before, but I think effectively we do want to ensure that projects that are applying for OR-MEP do have their funding secured in order to move forward. We just want to avoid having a 6-month gap of selecting a project and maybe they don't move forward because then it takes away an opportunity from another project from being selected. And really the essential prerequisites are that you can reserve incentives within 6 months of being selected, and aim to start within 18 months. Tim, did you want to add anything there?
No, other than if you're not ready to go for this funding round, there's no one time and you can't apply again rule in place. You can reapply if it better suits your project's timelines.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, and I think if this person, they have more project-specific considerations, feel free to reach out to us during this enrollment period.
Great, thank you. Okay, next question is related to culturally specific organizations or culturally responsive organizations. So is there any consideration for projects that have a plan in place to actively reach out to potential BIPOC residents, but they aren't yet partnering with a CSO or CRO because they don't exist close enough to the project?
So we do have those sections, like, we want to see those partnerships with CSOs, or if you're a rural project, demonstrating that you are a culturally responsive organization. And if you don't yet meet those definitions, you can also not opt to seek those points. That is just how we have it laid out, because we do want to see that those partnerships and intent, because we do find that that does realize the intent of having BIPOC residents being reflected in the property.
And one point of clarification for the CRO question in part B. If you're a rural project, you must be the culturally responsive organization in order to qualify for those 3 points, not partnering with a CRO.
Yeah, so that's the culturally responsive organization should be the applicant that's applying for OR-MEP funds.
Great, thank you both. Okay, we have a couple minutes left, so we'll see if we can get through a few more of these. A question about location. So the question is, OHSU's spreadsheet puts the project in Portland, but the site is within Gresham city limits. Is this open for review and discussion, or is the OHSU designation set in stone?
Yeah, there are some, the address lookup. I know sometimes a place can be considered Portland or outside of Portland city limits. So if you want to let us know, reach out to us with your address. We can review it and see if that's the correct designation. There are just some unique scenarios as well, with like a lookup tool isn't always perfect.
Thank you. Confirmation on the eligibility. So a project must be served by Pacific Power or Portland General Electric to qualify.
Yes, so that is an overarching eligibility requirement because of how the program is funded. From the public purpose charge, we can only serve projects in Pacific Power or PGE service area.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Is there a minimum score required?
There is, I believe the minimum is 10 points. But I will say from experience, most projects are well above that minimum, and the projects that do get selected are tend to be above that. And you can sort of see a breakdown of the average scores from the previous rounds on our website as well.
Great, thank you. Let's see. Maybe we can take one more question, Becca, and then wrap things up, and we can follow up offline with any additional questions.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I think this is maybe a follow-up more specific to an earlier question, but do projects need to have all funding committed in order to be selected? And if so, what would you consider committed? And then the question also asks about the new ORCA process from OHCS and whether the letter of intent that OHCS provides would suffice as commitment of funds.
Yeah, I'm guessing that's possibly connected to the previous question that came up. And I would just say, similarly, we do want to select projects that can move forward. So has enough funding committed that is likely to move forward. And like Tim mentioned, if you're not ready at this round, there will be future rounds every 6 months until 2027.
Okay, great. Thanks, Becca.
All right, well, I think we're at time. If any of you have any further questions after listening to this webinar as you're going through the application, feel free to reach out to us via email or phone. And yeah, we look forward to seeing your open enrollment applications come through. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you all. Bye.